What have we killed all mosquitoes? It's a warm summer evening. The last blush of sunlight fades behind the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet. A light breeze carries the smell of cut grass, the laughter of neighbors, the clink of ice in tall glasses. Everything feels timeless, until you notice what's missing. There is no faint, irritating whine in your ear, no sudden itch on your forearm, no sharp sting on your ankle. The air is still, yet strangely empty. In this world, mosquitoes are gone. All of them, forever. It didn't happen by accident. Humanity, after centuries of swatting, spraying, and cursing these tiny predators, finally unleashed the ultimate solution. A global eradication campaign, backed by the most advanced genetic engineering ever attempted, wiped out an entire family of insects that had survived for more than 100 million years. Not a single egg, larva, or adult remains. The first days after the announcement are euphoric. Headlines scream, "The deadliest animal on Earth is no more." Parks overflow with picnickers, tropical resorts advertise bite-free vacations, and children play outside at dusk without parents yelling them back indoors. Billions of dollars once spent on mosquito nets, insecticides, and disease treatment are suddenly freed for other uses. The world, it seems, has just taken a giant leap toward a healthier, more carefree future. Yet beneath the celebrations lurks a quiet unease. Ecologists and biologists warn that nothing in nature exists in isolation. Mosquitoes, hated though they are, have always been part of something larger, a food web, a climate rhythm, a history that predates humanity. Erasing them is like removing a gear from a machine without knowing what it powers. At first, no one listens. After all, we've just ended the reign of the deadliest animal to humans. What could possibly go wrong? And so the story begins. A thought experiment about what happens when humanity's war on mosquitoes doesn't just succeed, it ends in total, irreversible victory. To truly understand the scale of what humanity has done, we have to step back into the world before the eradication. Mosquitoes were not just a seasonal annoyance at backyard barbecues. They were everywhere. Nearly 3,500 known species thrived across every continent except Antarctica, from dense tropical jungles to frozen Arctic tundras. They had been here since the time of the dinosaurs, surviving ice ages, volcanic winters, and the rise and fall of empires. For humans, though, mosquitoes were not simply background noise. They were killers, the deadliest animals on Earth. Not because of their size or strength, but because of what they carried. Malaria, dengue fever, Zika virus, yellow fever, West Nile virus. Mosquitoes were nature's most efficient disease delivery system. Each year they caused more than 700,000 deaths, mostly in poorer tropical regions where healthcare was scarce. Generations grew up knowing that a single bite could mean sickness, disability, or death. Over the decades, humanity fought back. We sprayed insecticides, drained swamps, distributed mosquito nets, and developed vaccines for some of their diseases. The victories were real, but temporary. Mosquitoes adapted quickly, evolving resistance to chemicals, shifting breeding grounds, and finding new ways to thrive. In the late 21st century, a new hope emerged. Genetic engineering. CRISPR-based gene drives could alter entire mosquito populations by introducing traits that either made them sterile or unable to carry diseases. At first, these techniques were tested locally, on isolated islands or small regions, to control malaria outbreaks. The results were promising. Then came the turning point. A global coalition decided to scale the project to every continent. The argument was simple. If we could wipe out a creature responsible for so much human suffering, why stop at partial measures? It would be the medical equivalent of landing on the moon, a triumph of science over one of nature's most persistent threats. And so, the campaign began. Billions of engineered mosquitoes were released, carrying genetic instructions that doomed their own species. Within years, the numbers collapsed. Within decades, they were gone. Humanity had pulled off the impossible. The buzz was gone. The diseases were gone, and for a moment, it felt like we had fixed a problem as old as civilization itself. It didn't happen with a bang or a great cataclysm. There was no single moment when the last mosquito died in some cinematic flash of light. Instead, it crept into human awareness like a change in the seasons, slow, then sudden. In small equatorial villages, health workers noticed something strange. The malaria wards in rural clinics, once overflowing with feverish patients, began to empty. In cities along the Amazon, the familiar red welts on children's arms and legs stopped appearing. In Southeast Asia, the smell of burning mosquito coils at night faded from homes. Nobody could pinpoint the exact day, but somewhere in the background hum of human life, the buzz had gone silent. Then came the official confirmation. The World Health Organization announced what many already suspected. Mosquitoes were extinct. Not just the disease-carrying Anopheles or Aedes species, but all of them. 3,500 species gone from the Earth. Within hours, the news was everywhere. Humanity wins blared on headlines. Television anchors struggled to mask their amazement. Social media erupted with celebratory posts. Photos of outdoor weddings at sunset without a single guest swatting the air. Videos of children splashing in ponds without fear of bites. Governments declared the eradication a global victory. Politicians claimed it as proof of human ingenuity. Pharmaceutical companies quickly announced they were redirecting billions in research, once dedicated to mosquito-borne diseases, toward other medical challenges. In tropical nations, tourism agencies launched campaigns promoting the safest summers in history. But not everyone celebrated. In university lecture halls and quiet conference rooms, ecologists, entomologists, and climate scientists traded uneasy glances. They knew that mosquitoes, however hated, were a keystone food source for countless creatures: fish, birds, amphibians, and bats. Their larvae filtered organic matter from standing water, shaping the balance of aquatic ecosystems. Removing them entirely was like pulling a brick from the bottom of a wall and hoping it wouldn't topple. For now, those warnings were drowned out by the sound of human relief. Humanity had slain one of its oldest enemies, and the victory felt absolute. The world was lighter, freer, and, for the first time in history, completely without the buzz. In the first few years after the eradication, life seemed unquestionably better. In Africa's malaria belt, once plagued by constant outbreaks, mortality rates plummeted. Hospitals that had dedicated entire wards to mosquito-borne diseases repurposed them for maternal care, cancer treatment, and emergency surgery. Children who might have been bedridden with fever were now running in open fields at dusk, their laughter unbroken by sudden itching or swatting hands. The economic impact was immediate. Countries collectively saved billions in healthcare costs. Farmers in tropical regions saw productivity rise as fewer workers fell ill during planting and harvest seasons. Tourism surged in destinations once shunned for their biting clouds: beaches in the Caribbean, safaris in East Africa, jungles in Southeast Asia. The global travel industry called it a golden age of safe adventure. Consumer habits shifted too. Shelves once crowded with insect repellents, citronella candles, and mosquito netting emptied as those products became relics of a bygone threat. Chemical companies quietly wound down pesticide production, redirecting resources toward other markets. For the average person, the absence of mosquitoes became so normal that it was hard to remember they'd ever existed. And yet, in the shadow of this triumph, subtle changes began to stir in the natural world. Birdwatchers in northern wetlands noticed certain migratory species returning in smaller numbers. Fishermen in tropical river deltas reported unusual algae blooms, a sign that aquatic ecosystems were shifting. Scientists documented drops in populations of animals that relied heavily on mosquito larvae for food: small fish, frogs, and certain dragonflies. These warnings made headlines briefly, but were quickly buried under stories of booming economies and healthier populations. The narrative was clear: humanity had won. The short-term benefits were overwhelming, and any negative effect seemed distant, abstract, or exaggerated. But ecosystems are patient in their responses, and nature rarely shows its full hand right away. The gears of the planet were still turning, quietly adjusting to the absence of a creature we had assumed was expendable. At first, the environmental ripples were easy to overlook. A missing bird species here, a patch of unusual algae there, details noticed only by scientists and nature enthusiasts. But as the decades rolled on, those ripples began to converge into waves. In the Arctic tundra, migratory birds like the red knot and certain sandpipers once timed their breeding to coincide with the explosion of summer mosquitoes. Billions of the insects provided a calorie-rich feast, allowing parent birds to feed their chicks quickly during the brief window of Arctic warmth. Without that seasonal bounty, nesting success plummeted. Chicks starved before they could fledge, and populations began to collapse. By the third decade after eradication, some species had vanished entirely from regions they had occupied for millennia. Farther south, tropical wetlands faced their own crisis. Mosquito larvae, once a major part of the diet for small fish and amphibians, had been a quiet but critical cog in the aquatic food web. With their disappearance, algae bloomed unchecked in stagnant waters, depleting oxygen levels and suffocating fish. Predators that once ate mosquito larvae, like dragonfly nymphs, turned to other prey, creating unexpected pressure on aquatic insect populations. Humans began to feel the knock-on effects. In some regions, the decline of fish stocks hurt local fishing economies. In others, an unexpected rival stepped into the void mosquitoes had left. Ticks. Once held in partial check by competition for hosts, tick populations surged. With them came a rise in Lyme disease, tick-borne encephalitis, and other illnesses that mosquitoes had never carried. Politically, the once-united celebration began to fracture. Environmental groups accused the global coalition of acting recklessly, prioritizing human comfort over planetary stability. Governments that had championed the eradication now found themselves defending it against growing public unease. For the first time, the question no longer felt hypothetical. Had humanity's victory been worth the price? Nature was answering, but not in the way we had expected. The absence of a single creature was proving to be a hole in the web of life far wider than we imagined. To understand why removing mosquitoes triggered such far-reaching disruption, we have to see them not as solitary pests, but as part of an intricate network of biological relationships. In popular imagination, mosquitoes exist only to bite us. But that's a distortion. Only females from certain species feed on blood. And even then, it's solely to gain the proteins needed to develop eggs. The rest of their diet, and all of the male's diet, comes from plant nectar. This makes them accidental, but significant pollinators for a range of plants, including rare orchids and certain tropical crops. Their larvae, which hatch in standing water, act as natural filters. They consume microscopic algae, organic detritus, and microorganisms, helping to keep aquatic environments balanced. In doing so, they become a primary food source for fish, amphibians, and aquatic insects. Remove the larvae, and you don't just lose a meal, you alter nutrient cycles, oxygen levels, and the timing of seasonal booms in other organisms. From an evolutionary perspective, mosquitoes have been shaping life for millions of years. In humans, the threat of mosquito-borne diseases like malaria drove genetic adaptations. The sickle cell trait, for instance, offers partial protection against malaria, proof of how deeply mosquitoes have influenced our biology. Entire predator species, from bats to birds, have evolved hunting behaviors timed to mosquito activity. Their disappearance creates a vacuum, forcing predators to adapt, migrate, or perish. There's also a broader principle at play. Ecosystems operate through redundancy. When one species disappears, others can sometimes fill its role, but only if the niche is narrow. Mosquitoes occupy multiple niches: pollinator, prey, nutrient recycler, disease vector. No single organism can replace all of those functions. By erasing mosquitoes entirely, we didn't just silence an annoying buzz, we ripped out a multi-threaded connection in Earth's web of life. In complex systems, such disruptions rarely stay isolated. The consequences, as we were now learning, cascade outward in ways both subtle and devastating. Half a century after the last mosquito vanished, the consequences stopped being quiet ripples and became crashing waves. The first major collapse came in the far north. In wetlands that once teemed with summer life, fish populations crashed. Without mosquito larvae to feed on in their early stages, juvenile fish struggled to survive the lean months. By the time the breeding season rolled around, there simply weren't enough mature fish to sustain local communities that had relied on them for generations. The loss of fish was only the beginning. Migratory birds, already weakened by decades without the seasonal mosquito feast, failed in greater numbers each year. Nesting colonies shrank. Predator species that depended on the birds, foxes, raptors, began to starve or move elsewhere. The Arctic food chain, once a resilient web, now sagged under the strain of missing links. In tropical regions, the ecological vacuum allowed other insects to rise. Chief among them were midges, small gnat-like swarms that proved even more aggressive than mosquitoes. Unlike their predecessors, many of these midges did not require water to breed, allowing them to spread into areas where mosquitoes never thrived. They bit livestock, damaged crops, and disrupted human outdoor life, undoing much of the comfort people had celebrated decades earlier. Public health systems, relieved of mosquito-borne diseases, now faced new threats. Tick-borne illnesses continued to climb, and in some regions, novel pathogens emerged in insect populations that had expanded unchecked. Governments scrambled to respond, but their actions were fragmented. Diplomatic tensions rose. Nations accused each other of rushing into eradication without considering global consequences. Environmental lawsuits were filed against the original research institutions that had championed the gene drive release. The phrase mosquito mistake began appearing in political speeches and on protest banners. For the first time, even those who had cheered the loudest at the victory began to wonder if humanity had underestimated the complexity of the problem. The planet was showing us, in no uncertain terms, that nature abhors a vacuum, and it was filling that vacuum in ways we could neither predict nor control. The ecological crises reached a point where doing nothing was no longer an option. Fisheries had collapsed in entire regions, bird migrations were permanently disrupted, and insect populations spun out of balance. What had once been subtle warnings from scientists had transformed into global emergencies. Humanity faced an uncomfortable truth. We had won our war against mosquitoes, but in doing so, we had destabilized the very systems that supported life. Research teams across the globe rushed to find solutions. In the biotech hubs of Singapore, San Francisco, and Berlin, scientists began experimenting with synthetic eco-replacements, engineered insects designed to mimic the ecological roles of mosquitoes without carrying disease. The concept was bold: create a sterile species that could serve as prey for fish and birds, pollinate plants, and recycle nutrients in wetlands. But developing a species that could survive in such diverse habitats without itself becoming invasive proved staggeringly difficult. A more radical proposal emerged: resurrect mosquitoes from preserved genetic material, but modify them so they could no longer transmit deadly pathogens. This clean mosquito would, in theory, restore lost ecosystem functions without reviving old public health nightmares. The debate this sparked was fierce. Environmentalists argued that restoring a keystone species, even in altered form, was the only viable path to repairing the damage. Public health officials countered that reintroducing mosquitoes, in any form, was a gamble with human lives. Meanwhile, adaptation became the order of the day. Coastal communities that once depended on fishing shifted toward aquaculture and algae farming. Conservationists attempted to feed migratory birds artificially during breeding seasons. Urban areas built insect management programs to control the surging midge populations. Yet the larger question lingered like a shadow: were these efforts genuine solutions, or desperate patches on a system we had already broken beyond repair? Humanity had entered uncharted territory. not just scientifically, but morally. For the first time, we had to confront the possibility that the only way forward might involve undoing the very victory we had once celebrated as one of our greatest achievements. A century after the last mosquito vanished, the Earth has found a kind of uneasy balance. The old ecosystems, those finely tuned over millions of years, are gone. In their place are landscapes shaped by human intervention, synthetic biology, and a century of improvisation. Some wetlands remain eerily silent compared to their buzzing past, their food webs permanently altered. Migratory birds have either adapted to new feeding patterns, shifted their breeding grounds, or disappeared entirely. The tropical wetlands that once flourished with mosquito larvae now host engineered eco-insects that perform some of the same ecological functions, but their artificial nature has made the rhythms of the ecosystem less predictable. For humans, daily life feels safer in some ways. The great plagues of mosquito-borne diseases are remembered only in history books and museum exhibits, where preserved mosquito specimens sit under glass, labeled like artifacts from a distant war. In tropical cities, children play outside at dusk with no nets, no coils, no sprays. Farmers no longer lose workers to sudden bouts of fever, and medical systems, freed from decades of constant outbreaks, focus on chronic illnesses and preventative care. Yet the cost is written in the reduced biodiversity of the planet. Some species never returned. Certain fish populations remain a fraction of their former numbers, and entire chains of predator-prey relationships have been replaced with fragile, human-managed equivalents. The midges, ticks, and other opportunistic species that surged in the early post-mosquito decades are now controlled through complex insect management programs that must be maintained indefinitely, or the chaos will return. This is the new normal, a world without the buzz, but also without the natural balance that once came with it. Humanity has learned to live in this altered reality, but the lessons are etched deeply into global consciousness. Every child learns in school that eliminating a species is not like turning off a light. It is more like removing a pillar from a bridge. The bridge may stand for a while, but the structure will never be the same. The eradication of mosquitoes became one of humanity's most famous victories and one of its most sobering lessons. In our determination to eliminate the world's deadliest animal, we succeeded in saving millions of human lives. But in doing so, we also dismantled an ancient thread in Earth's tapestry, a thread whose importance we didn't fully understand until it was gone. For decades, the story was told as a triumph of science, a tale of how gene drives and global cooperation overcame a problem that had plagued humanity for thousands of years. But with time, the narrative shifted. Historians began to frame it as both a marvel and a warning, an example of a human ingenuity and human short-sightedness intertwined. The lesson was not that we should tolerate suffering or allow preventable diseases to flourish. It was that every living thing, no matter how small or despised, is part of a system far more complex than our models can capture. Mosquitoes were not just carriers of death. They were pollinators, recyclers, prey, and an evolutionary pressure that had shaped countless species, including our own. Future generations grew up with this knowledge embedded in their worldview. When debates arose about eradicating invasive plants, genetically altering entire species, or geoengineering the climate, policymakers cited the mosquito case as a precedent. Any proposal to change the planet at scale now faced a simple but profound question: do we truly understand what we are about to undo? And yet, there was also a note of hope in the story. The crisis forced humanity to innovate in new ways, to repair what it had damaged, and to confront the moral responsibility that comes with our technological power. We emerged from the experience more cautious, but also more aware of our role as stewards, not just users of the Earth. In the end, the question lingers: what if, instead of killing all mosquitoes, we had learned to live alongside them in safety? It's a question without an answer, but one that continues to echo through the choices we make, reminding us that in the vast and delicate web of life, every thread matters. So now, as the sun sets on our mosquito-free world, we're left with more than just the silence of summer nights. We're left with a reminder that every choice we make, every species we touch, carries echoes we cannot always hear at first. The mosquitoes are gone, but their absence hums quietly through rivers, skies, and forests, a missing note in Earth's ancient song. Perhaps our greatest achievement was not destroying a pest, but learning the cost of certainty in an uncertain world. The next time we stand on the brink of reshaping nature, may we remember the lessons hidden in that silence and ask, not just can we, but should we? Because in the end, the real question isn't what if we killed all mosquitoes? Or it's what if we learned to listen to the buzz before it's gone?